Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I make an annual trip to New York, so I live in Missoula, Montana. Grew up here on the East Coast, though. But I come here once a year for my dose of New York City, which of course is not enough. But I love coming here, and I love coming to B&H to lecture because I always have a full room, and I always get a lot of great feedback from people, years from this lecture day of people contacting me and commenting on lectures. So I love that. My name's Eileen Rafferty, and I have been doing photography a very long time. I've been teaching photography a very long time. And I have found in the last, 7, 8, 9 years that there's an abundance of information out there about the technical side of photography, right? Lots of information, good and bad. And that's great. We need that information. We have to become, astute at our medium. We have to become good technical tool users. We have to understand how to use the camera and the computers and the software, right? All that stuff that goes along is really important, okay? We can't really be creative and visual artists unless we know how to use the tools, okay? However, I think that for a long time, it's changing in the last few years, but there's not a lot of talk about the visual and creative side of the medium. Okay, so probably 7 or 8 years ago, I decided I was going to start focusing on talking about that because that's what interests me the most, and I think that it's a part of the teaching of photography that gets neglected a little bit. However, that's changed. I mean, in the last few years, there's so much talk about creativity, right? Google any TED Talk, or go on to Creative Live, right? It's really exciting how many more people are talking about creativity because I think people are realizing that creativity is something that underlies so many aspects of our life, not just for artists in the studio, but in so many things that we do. And of course, now business people are realizing that creativity is really important for running companies, running governments, okay, running nonprofit, running institutions. It's important. So I'm going to talk about it, of course, in the context of photography. And a few years ago here at B&H, I gave a lecture called Fostering Creativity. And this is what I talked about. I talked about the cycle of creativity. I talked about what I thought were 6 of the main, steps along the way in the cycle of creativity. And I've decided from there over the last few years to distill it down to what I think are 2 of the most integral parts of being creative. And that, I believe, is ritual and curiosity. I think that these 2 conditions are really, really important for creativity. And not only are they important, but they help our creativity flourish. Okay, so I'm going to distill it down to talking about ritual and curiosity. And I have, over the past many years, I have, not only as a working artist been in my own cycle of creativity and my own ups and downs over a decade or more of being a working artist, but I also have a magazine, a quarterly publication, and I interview and have talked to many, 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 many artists about their creative cycles. And I also am an avid geek watcher of, any series, whether it's on PBS or any documentary I can find about artists, whether that's historical artists, contemporary artists. I want to hear, how do they stay creative? How do they stay innovative? And how do they stay motivated over decades of working? And so this isn't just my theory on creativity. This is what I've gathered over talking to many artists, watching many documentaries, reading many books. So that's where it really comes from. So this is pretty much how we're going to break it down. What is creativity? Really hard to define, but I'm just going to give you some answers that I got from other artists. Why ritual, why curiosity, and why both? So what is creativity? Well, the dictionary, one of the dictionaries, this is their definition: the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations. Okay, and this is something you see a lot in definitions of creativity, the ability to transcend the normal, and then the ability to turn that into something new, okay? This is a dear friend of mine that I teach workshops with, who is a fantastic lifelong artist and photographer. When I interviewed her, she said, when I'm in the moment, I've let go of consciously trying and I am just there. That's when I feel my senses are open in a way they're not at other times. That was her definition of creativity, when she gets into that zone, right? A colleague of mine, Andy Chemis, he says, not just existing, but thriving inside one's own head, and then following those weird thoughts, words, actions, images, wherever they might go until they become tangible, right? And I think this is a great one because it's that thing of taking an idea and turning it into something physical, right? For those of you who work in that way, that you have an idea first and then you make the work. Some people make the work and then figure out what it's about, okay? Both ways are valid. But for some of us, we have an idea and then we try to figure out, how do I put this into physical form? How do I make a photograph out of this, a series out of this, a book, a sculpture, a painting, a drawing, okay? So I like that idea of how do I take this something in my head and turn it into something tangible, but I also love that he says following these weird thoughts, words, actions, whatever it may be, right? Because we have an internal voice, as we all know, that says, no, that's stupid. No, don't do that. Nope, that's been done before. Nope. Why would you want to do that? Don't waste your time. On and on and on and on, okay? So if we can turn that internal voice down and allow these ideas to come up and entertain that idea and give it a try, that's the key. And sometimes you give it a try and it doesn't work. And then you try again. You come up with another idea. Okay, that's another thing that many, many, many artists talk about in their cycle is failure. Okay, we fail all the time. It's no big deal, right? In creativity, we try something, it doesn't work, we try again. We try something, it doesn't work, we try again. We try something, it kind of works. Maybe elements work and other elements don't work. Okay, it's just a part of the process. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who's a contadora, storyteller, tells old stories. She's a writer, she's an artist. She, of course, wrote the famous book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, and many other books. She says, some say the creative life is in ideas, some say it is in the doing. It is the love of something, having so much love for something that all that can be done with the overflow is to create. It is not a matter of wanting to, not a singular act of will. One solely must. Okay, and I believe this is firsthand experience for me. I know what it's like in my life when I'm making my work and what it's like in my life when I'm not making my work. I'm a much happier person when I'm making my work. When I'm finding the time, just like exercise or eating healthier, whatever it is that you do that you like to do that makes you feel better. Okay, reading, sleeping, right? But finding the time to do the things that we know are good for us, and for me, making my art is good for me. It's important, it's who I am. And when I don't do it, I'm neglecting a part of who I am, and I'm not as happy. I'm not as content, I don't feel as fulfilled. And I've been in both places, so I can really attest to this. It is not a singular act of will, one solely must. Twyla Tharp, the great choreographer, I'm going to refer to her excellent book a little bit later in this lecture. She says, after so many years, I've learned that being creative is a full-time job with its own daily patterns. The routine is as much a part of the creative process as the lightning bolt of inspiration. Maybe more, and this routine is available to everyone. Creativity is a habit, and the best creativity is a result of good work habits. That's it in a nutshell, right? So here comes, this is the ritual side of it, right? Getting to work, doing the work, and revisiting the work as often as possible. Hitting that shutter, right? Working in Lightroom or Photoshop, right? Printing the images, whatever it may be, but getting to work as often as possible. It's important. Me, one of the things, I have many, many things to say about creativity, as you all know 2 hours later and at the end of the day, and if you've watched any of my lectures. But when I got out of graduate school after getting my MFA in photography and video, I realized that I had just gotten a higher degree in problem solving, right? It's essentially, I think, what getting an MFA is. Also, there's more to it, but it's bumping up against obstacles and figuring out how to get around them or over them or knock them down or wait till they go away. Right? But as an artist, you're going to run into obstacles and you have to figure out how to get past them. It's just a part of the process. I promise this lecture will not be all text. I have lots of images. So I have a dear friend that I went to graduate school with, one of the most prolific artists that I know. His name is Tom Condon, and he said one of the greatest definitions of creativity in the many years and the many that I've heard. And he said, it is equal parts magic and tenacity, equal parts wonder and practice. Right? And this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? Taking that magic and tenacity, wonder and practice, and turning into what I think are the keys of creativity, which is ritual and curiosity. Okay, here's the ritual, here's the curiosity. Magic and tenacity, wonder and practice. Okay, so let's start with talking about ritual. I like to define words, even though we think we know what something is. I always like to look at the dictionary and see what they say it is. So ritual was defined as an established or prescribed procedure for a religious or other rite. Any act done regularly, usually without thinking about it. Okay, it's the definition proper. So why is ritual important in the creative process? Okay, well, this is why I love this book so much. When it first came out, I was like, yes, Twyla Tharp. She calls it the creative habit. And that's not necessarily habit like an addiction, right? But, you know, our work can be an addiction. But habit in the fact that she says you go to work every day and you make your work every day. Okay, this is a fantastic book. It's a no BS approach to creativity. I have a long book list of my favorite books about creativity. Some of them are, you know, the good juju. Some of them are hardcore Harvard professor, scientific research. Others are a little more spiritual. Hers is a no BS, everyday, practical guide to being creative over a long amount of time. Okay, so I have a few quotes here from her book. And this is her talking about ritual specifically, or what she calls habit. By making the start of a sequence automatic, you replace doubt and fear with comfort and routine, right? Think about the athletes who have the same ritual when they walk up to the foul line, right? You know, maybe they dribble 3 times and, you know, pull up the shorts and scratch or something, right? Or the batters in baseball who go up and make the same sort of move before they go up to bat, okay? That ritual or habit is something that you created or that athlete created in the beginning when they were probably first getting this routine down. And over time, it becomes something comfortable and something that can sort of become the thing that, again, comforts you and possibly replaces the anxiety. Okay, so in this situation, you might say, why is there anxiety around my art making? Well, I'd say you're not maybe pushing the limits if you're not experiencing anxiety around your art making, right? Art making takes courage, and it can be scary to put your stuff out there to the world and say, what do you think? Your most personal work sometimes for some people, right? So ritual or habit can create a sort of a call and response in the beginning and create something that becomes more comfortable over time and can replace that doubt. I love this one. It's vital to establish some rituals, automatic but decisive patterns of behavior at the beginning of the creative process when you are in the most peril of turning back, chickening out, giving up, or going the wrong way, right? Ritual also can remove these following questions, right? If you just get into the habit of going out and hitting that shutter every Tuesday or every night or editing your images every day at 3 o'clock, whatever your ritual becomes, okay? It takes away this question of, why am I doing this anyway? Right? Twyla Tharp says she has a taxi come to her apartment every morning at 5 o'clock. So she can't say she's not going to the gym to work out. She doesn't wake up and go, should I go to the gym today? Why should I go? Maybe I went 5 times this week. Maybe not, because the cab's waiting for her, right? So that's why she does it. So she gets into that cab every day and goes to the gym, okay? So it kind of removes these questions. Do I really feel like doing this, right? I don't know, it's kind of cold outside. I'm kind of sick of staring at the computer. I don't know, I did a lot of work this week. Well, maybe I don't feel like doing it, okay? When I first got my studio, I had come off a time period where I was focusing a lot on my teaching and my magazine and writing, and I wasn't in my studio making my own work as much. I was still making it, but not nearly to the degree that I had been in graduate school and not nearly to the degree that I wanted to be. And so when I first got my studio, I made myself go to that studio every single day. Every single day. And sometimes I went to my studio and I took a nap. That's fine. Sometimes I went to my studio and I tidied up. Sometimes I went to my studio and I read a book. Sometimes I went to my studio and I got something done. Okay, but the point is that I went there every single day in the beginning when there was fear and doubt and a chance of me chickening out, okay, and a chance of me creating bad habits of only going when I feel like it, or only going when there seemed to be some purpose, like I was making something really important and something was happening. Nope, I went every single day. And I remember my artist friends, a few of them were like, Eileen, like, chill out, it's okay. You don't have to go, like, wow, you're kind of being crazy about this. One of my painter friends, who's a very prolific painter, and I said, nope, I have to do this in the beginning, I must. And I did it for probably an entire year. And now I don't have to go to the studio every day, but because now I'm in the habit of going, I can't wait to get in my studio now. I go because I want to go, right? I go because I need to go. But in the beginning, I wasn't in that habit or routine yet. And I was worried that if I went 3 times a week, that could turn into twice a week, that could turn into once a week. So I made myself go every day. And I didn't beat myself up if I went and read a book and took a nap, okay? But I got my body there every day. And if you get there every day and you're in that creative space, something's gonna happen eventually, and it did, okay? Or the question of what should I do? Well, again, if I didn't have a big project happening at the time, which I didn't because I was just starting to really heavily dive back in my work, and the beginning is always the hardest, right? I mean, if I wasn't making something really meaningful that I knew I was going to show the world, then there's maybe less value or importance on what I was doing and getting to the studio that day. So it erased this question for me too. Well, what will I do when I get there? It didn't matter. It didn't matter what I did when I got there. I just got there, okay? So around this question, and actually all these questions, I want to talk about a photographic project that I did years ago. And it was before I got my studio, when I was in that time frame of teaching a lot, traveling a lot, writing a lot, and was making my work, but was feeling like, oh man, it's kind of taking the back seat a little bit. And so I used to teach in the summer intensive program at Rocky Mountain School of Photography for a very long time. And I was a core teacher there, and that's a busy time for us. And so we were entering summer, and my dear friend, who's also a photographer, her and I made a pact that we would get together once a week and we would go shoot for several hours, just get together and go shoot, so that we would be shooting actively all summer long. So the first few times we went out, it's like, you know, when you go out and you don't really know what you're shooting and you don't really know what you want to shoot, it was like, I don't know, what am I going to do? Well, I don't know what to shoot. And so the one time we went out, I was looking for props, and I grabbed a paint can and found this paint roller that had plastic wrapped around it. And I just grabbed those. And I often like to, you know, find old dresses, and often I'm in my own photographs, not because I love to photograph myself, but because I need a body in my photographs and I don't have anyone else to photograph. Right? I can't photograph my friend because she's shooting too. I'm not going to grab some stranger off the street. Of course I could hire a model, but I don't even know what I'm doing yet. I'm going to waste my model's time and my money with the model, right? So I often just step in and I try to be the anonymous person a little bit, okay? Which is why I'm never like looking at the camera like, hi, it's me. So this was the first photograph that I took in this series, and at the time, I just thought it would be kind of interesting to look like I'm painting in this old rundown building, yet there's no paint on the roller and there's plastic on it. I thought that was kind of funny and interesting, right? And so this was the first photograph, and when I took it, and at the time we were making these images, I had no ideas at all. Just grabbed the props and went with it. But afterwards, when I was editing, I was like, gosh, there's something about this image I really like. There's something compelling. I don't know what it is. And again, ignoring that little voice going, "What? This is stupid. Well, you don't even know what you're doing," right? I said, I don't know, there's something about this picture that I like. I'm just gonna keep going with it. So every week when we would go out and shoot, I didn't have to think about what am I doing, why am I doing this, is this stupid? I grabbed any sort of painting implements that I could find, and I went to different scenes, wherever we decided to shoot, and I did something with the painting implements. That's it. And I did this for an entire summer, having no idea what I was doing and why, but it became the ritual and it removed all the questions. And it was a ton of fun, and it turned into a full-on body of work. So these are some of the images from that. So again, I ran with it for about 3 months. And it wasn't until the end of the summer that a student of mine, in fact, my students, I was showing them the work throughout the summer, and they were really funny because they'd like submit their work with a paint can in it or something, you know, kind of making fun of me a little bit in a good way. But, you know, I was like, I know, this is crazy. I don't know why I'm doing this. This is ridiculous. But by the end of doing it, I was starting to get an idea of what it was about. And I had a student who was a painting teacher, actually, who said something really key to me. She said, you know, it's interesting, Eileen, in all these photographs, you're never actually painting. You know, there's almost hardly in any, I mean, there might be paint on the brush, but you're never making a mark. It's like that moment right before, she said, when I'm teaching painting students, they're standing in front of the blank canvas and they're petrified because they don't want to make that first mark. She's like, and I walk up and I splatter paint on their canvas and I say, go, start. We just started, go. And when she said that to me, I thought, oh my gosh. So I called the project Poised to Make a Mark. And I realized that it was in this time period where I was just, it was like that pause just before a lot of things happen, a lot of things. It was just that moment between that sort of space before, right, ideas and things, you know, sort of explode and open up. Okay, so I realized later what that project was about. And that's not only an example of just going with the ritual and taking away all those questions, but also just running with that weird idea in your head just because. Okay, just running with it and having faith that if you're responding to that image, there's something about that first image for me. That first image, having the faith that I knew that there was something important there because I liked it. Not because anybody else liked it, but because it said something to me, and then running with it was very important. And I've learned that lesson over time, that that's important. Okay, if you have an image that is speaking to you, there's something there and there's a reason why. You just need to figure out why. So my friend Tom, another quote that he said in his interview that I loved, I personally need something to wake up my nonverbal self, my soul, to make my chest get bigger. And since you can't have that feeling all the time, you need a real commitment to practice, a rigorous practice. Okay, and this is what Twyla Tharp was talking about when she said the lightning bolt, right? You know, we love when the lightning bolt hits us. We love when we have that aha moment. I loved when that student said that to me and I was like, oh my gosh, right? But those can't happen every day. They only happen every now and then. So meanwhile, you just got to get to work, okay? I would have never had that revelation about the work if I wouldn't have made the work in the first place. So once developed, art habits are deep-seated, reliable, and helpful. They are reliable, helpful, deep-seated, and they are stylistically important, okay? Meaning, if you continue with a ritual of something and your habits in your work, over time, those things themselves will become your style or can become your style. Okay, meaning if you go to work with your photography, with your art, whatever it may be, if you go to that work every day, after several years, or who knows how long it will take, some sort of style is probably going to emerge from that work. If you are being authentic about what you really want to make and making what you want to make, not what the world wants to see. So I love the story. I have a story about style. I had this student once. I was doing an evening lecture at Rocky Mountain School of Photography. A student came up to me and said, you know, I just don't think I have a style in my work. I mean, I don't feel like I have some underlying thread or theme or style. He's like, what is this style? Where does it come from? Meanwhile, this character walks up to me. You should have seen visually what this guy looked like. I mean, you want to talk about style? I mean, he was like something that came out of 1974. I mean, he was awesome. Like from head to toe was just decked out. And I just looked at him and he's like, I don't understand what this style thing is when it comes to my photography. And I looked at him and I said, what made you put this on today? And he was like, well, this is what I look like. This is what I wear. And I said, exactly. I mean, there's your style right there. There it is. Just be who you are. Be authentic about the work you want to make the work. And I guarantee you that style of who you are will come out in the work itself. So let's look at some examples of contemporary artists. And I don't always look at photographers, right? There's so many photographers to look at. I teach a lot of photo history. And in my lectures, you're going to see, especially in the black and white class, I use a lot of historical images. But I also think that all the other artists out there are great role models as well. Okay? And Mark Rothko, as probably most of you know, was an abstract painter. He's no longer with us. But the reason I use him as an example is because it is known that Mark Rothko got up every single day and went to his studio as if he was going to an office. He got up, he had breakfast with his family, he put on his clothes, his coat, his hat, right? Got on the subway, went to his studio, was there by 9 o'clock every day, worked till 6 o'clock, came home Monday through Friday. Okay, he went to his studio as if he were going to an office, a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job. Okay, that's what allowed Rothko, besides his, well, that's something I want to say. I mean, everybody thinks, or so many people think that artists, are just born these brilliant, creative people. I agree that a lot of artists who are seemingly creative from the beginning probably had creative parents and grew up in a creative environment, right? I guarantee you they had an architect for a father and a designer for a mother, or a seamstress for a mother and a graphic designer for a father. Okay, so the people who seem like they were born with this, they weren't born with it. It was fostered from a young age. They were around it a lot. Okay, how many writers are from parents of writers? Okay, on and on. Okay, but for the rest of us who weren't born to amazing artists, it comes with practice, like anything else, like learning a language, like learning to ski, like learning to cook. The more you do it, the better you will be at it. Okay, so Rothko is who he is, or was who he was, because he went to work every single day, not because he just woke up and was a genius at painting one day, right? Dale Chihuly, the great glass artist. There's a great video series called Inspirations. And the interviewer interviews 5 or 6 artists. It's David Bowie, the musician, Dale Chihuly, Roy Lichtenstein, the painter. There's a ceramics artist in there, Edward Locke, the choreographer. There's a modern dancer in there. And she interviews them about getting to work and their studio and their whole creative process. And one thing that I love that Dale Chihuly says, who arguably is probably the most famous working glass artist today, right? And what Dale Chihuly said is, he said, you know what? I go to my studio every day. And he said, do you want to know why? He goes, because I could have slept 8 hours last night, had a protein shake in the morning, gone for a run, and gone to my studio. Or I could have gone out last night, stayed out till 2, go to my studio totally hungover on no sleep. I don't know when I'm going to make good work, and I don't know when I'm going to make bad work. It is not related to how I felt or how much rest I got, or if I had 10 whiskeys or if I had 2 coffees. It has nothing to do with that, right? So he's like, it's not about how I feel when I get there. I don't know when I'm going to make good work and when I'm going to make bad work. So I just go and I make the work every day, okay? Roy Lichtenstein, right? Again, no longer with us, but the great painter. The reason I use him as an example is because if you want to talk about ritual, right? This guy got on this idea of these circular dots and went with it for like 4 decades and made this insane body of work. And did the work evolve? Absolutely. It was not all, this is how it started, right? With the cartoons. And then it evolved. It evolved into sculpture. It evolved into black and whites. It evolved into landscapes. Okay, so the work changed over 4 decades, but the technique and the ritual of making the circles stayed the same. Okay, and if that's not an artist sticking to what he is enjoying and what he loves and what he desires, I don't know what is. I'm sure there were moments where he was like, I should probably stop this circle thing. This is getting a little crazy. Maybe I should do something else. But he didn't. He's like, this is what I do. And I guarantee you he was doing it because he liked it. Not because then he felt forced to, because at this point, 30 years later, Roy Lichtenstein could have made anything and people are going to pay attention, right? So, you know, if you're gonna do this work for 40 years, it's because you like it and you're enjoying it. Roy Lichtenstein also is in that Inspirations video, and he says the same thing. He goes to his studio every single day, but what Lichtenstein does is he will find productive periods in his year. So he might go to the studio every day for 5 months and then take 4 months off. Okay, so it's up to each individual to find out their working habits. Okay, for him, he knows he needs that dead time to rejuvenate, to travel, to do whatever he needs to do to refill the coffers, and then he needs that chunk of time throughout the year that he works really hard. Okay, that was his process. But when he's working, he's there every day. He also says that he works on multiple projects at a time. So he would have 4 or 5 paintings going at the same time, so that when he runs into a problem with one, he abandons that and goes to another one. And then by going to the other ones, he finds solutions for the problem in the other. Okay, that's his working method. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. We can't figure out how to have a workflow or make our work by looking at other people's workflows. Okay, the students that came to the school so often wanted us to, like, black and white, give them a workflow in photography. Well, I can give you a safe workflow, meaning, you know, non-destructive, backing up your files, but I can't tell you as a photographer what your workflow is, because only you know, right? What your methods are, what kind of photography you do, how many hours you can devote, how much computer space you have, how much money you have in the bank, right? I mean, there's so many factors that will determine the way you work. This is more of Lichtenstein. This was his work in the later years, doing more of the Japanese style, Chinese painting influence. So speaking of circles, okay, which is what Roy Lichtenstein did for 4 decades, I want to talk about that idea of running with an idea and creating some habit and ritual, like I did with the painting, okay? But that was a project that lasted about 3 months, and then it was done, okay? But circles is something that I realize now after, you know, I don't know, about 2 decades of working, that is a really strong underlying theme in my work, and it's become something I'm a little obsessed with, okay? And the thing is, I'm bringing this up because we're talking about ritual, but also because I want to make the example of taking the time to look at your work and find those underlying themes that are there. Okay, I wrote an article in my magazine that was called Looking Back. I wrote it in the fall because I think it's a good time for that. You can do it whenever. Okay, but the point is, at some point, you need to look back over the work that you've made thus far and see if there's anything emerging out of it. And maybe get someone else with a trained eye to look at it and see if anything's rising to the surface out of this work, right? I think that especially as photographer, more than any other medium, we're so forward looking. I mean, we're just like this in life because of the pace of life, but definitely as photographers, because we can pump out files out of that camera, right? Pump it out, right? And we just thousands and thousands of images, and it's really easy to just keep making and putting it on the computer, making, putting it on the computer, edit, move on, edit, move on, edit, move on, what's next, what's next, what's next? And that's great, okay? But I think also there's something to be said for stopping, taking some time to see where you've been and where you are now and where you might be going, and take stock of what have I done, what do I like that I've done, what do I not like that I've done, right? What's speaking to me, what's not, what's rising out of this work? Are there any themes or trends or visual styles? And again, if you can't see that yourself, for those of you who are in portfolio reviews, bravo, right? Sometimes you have to let other people look at the work and see if they can find trends or styles. It would happen all the time where students would come to me with a body of work and it would just hit me in the face. Like, oh my gosh, do you see this thing that you're drawn to over and over again? And they didn't even see it, okay? So sometimes you have to do the work yourself, always. Look at the work and see if there's any themes. So this is over decades, and I didn't realize this until probably 5-6 years ago. All of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, this is kind of crazy. Okay, so this is a still from a video that I made. Look what I'm doing, right? I'm drawing a circle around myself. This was a project that I did now 9 years ago. Okay, they were 4 2x2 foot wood panels with photo emulsion silk screens. Okay, I work in many different mediums, but everything is related to photographs. Everything has photographs in it, began as a photograph or a video still. okay? And look how I encapsulated these. This is a photograph that I took of the kids, how I encapsulated them in the circle. Okay, then this is another body of work, right? Where these circles were meant to emulate like moon phases. Okay, these are 2x2 wood panels painted black. These are photo emulsion silk screens. These are photographs and then text, and it's all sealed in wax. These are just straight photographs, okay? But after I realized this obsession I was having with circles, I started to go back and, I was kind of chuckling to myself, like, oh, look at this, right? This is the first cover of my magazine. Look what I put on the front. Now, it was a winter issue and I put snowflakes, but they're just giant repetitive circles. Again, not consciously, I wasn't like, I'm going to put circles on the first issue of my magazine. Nope. I went back and started seeing this trend. These are photographs, but they're illustrations that I sort of created from scratch in Photoshop. These are other people's art that sit in a folder on my desktop called Inspiration. So I gather images that I like and I throw them in a desktop. You might put them in a scrapbook. You might actually cut them out, whatever. I think everybody should have a folder or a book of things that they like. Colors you like, designs you like, photographs you like, work that you like. Nothing makes me more sad when my students, when I ask them to name a photographer that inspires them and they can't, right? It's like, well, we don't work in a vacuum. And there's so many people out there who can inspire you and give you ideas and just get you excited. So, I would think you all living in New York are probably not those people because you're so exposed to so much, right? But I think it's really important to look at other work and be inspired by it. And look at the work that was in my inspirations folder, right? Look at the repetitive circles. I'm also a big fan of Japanese art, so you might see that trend too. This is other work that I made that are photographs where I would draw on its photograph and pencil. Okay, so I want to forward, that was all much older work, okay, but I want to forward to my first few months in my studio, right? When I was making myself go every day, but feeling like I wasn't really doing anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a project idea. I wasn't completely focused on what I was doing because I didn't know. So I just allowed myself to go in my studio and play, okay? And that doesn't mean there weren't days that I will admit, went into my studio and cried because I was like, what am I doing? I'm so lost. I don't even know what I'm doing. This is so stupid. I just went and dabbled for 2 hours and didn't make anything. What am I doing? Okay, but on the other days, I just went and did whatever I felt like doing, okay? But I had to make some work. So this was just pure dabbling and doodling, okay? And most of these are big, but it doesn't matter. But this is just me completely doodling with charcoal and paint. And this is me cutting out doodles I had made and laying them down on paper in different shapes and then photographing them. I photographed everything. This is more dabbling and doodling in the studio. So this is not stuff that I'm going to put out to the world and put in a frame and put in a gallery. Okay? It was steps along the way. It's stepping stones. Okay, but I realize now that I am completely immersed in year 2 of a full-on focused project, that all of this stuff that felt meaningless along the way and felt like just sheer wasting of time, dabbling, doodling, was leading to the meaningful work that I'm making now. And this is part of the work. There's 2 bodies of work that I'm doing. So these are full life-size drawings. This is a photograph of me and my brother. So that's me, the little one, many years ago. So my dad was an avid photographer, so I have a lot of old Kodachromes, a lot of old 8mm film, and I use a lot of that work in my work. Okay, so it's an old photograph my dad took of us that I've broken down into a line drawing in Photoshop, and then I print it on transparency, and then I project it, and then I trace it. And then what you're seeing, the black, is actually tiny circles in ink that are making the photograph. This is a work in progress. To me, that last slide isn't done. There's probably going to be another step. I don't know what it is yet. But meanwhile, I have a bunch of these on their way to going wherever they're going. This is another project that I've been heavily working on for about 2 years, because one of these drawings might take me 3 months. And so these are about 3 feet by, they could be 2 feet by 3 feet, 3 feet by 4 feet. But this is the entire drawing, and this is a detail. So you can see what I'm doing is similar. I'm taking a photograph, I'm bringing it down to a line drawing, printing it on transparency, projecting it, and then these are tiny little white circles that I'm drawing and filling in all the negative space behind them with black ink. And this is what I've been doing for 2 years, right? So I'm still making tiny circles, but now they're becoming something, right? This is work that I would want to show, and this is work that I am excited about and does feel meaningful and does feel like a project to me. Okay, but all those hours of doodling circles were leading to something. They're all of the Japanese author Yasunari Kawabata, who's a huge influence to me. We'll talk about him later and why. So ask yourself, what rituals have you created around your art making, right? Just stop and think for a second. Do you have any rituals in your photography, in your whatever it is? I'm assuming everybody's in here as photographers, but I'm not sure. Some of you also might have other skills. Maybe you're a woodworker. Maybe you do ceramics. Maybe you draw. Whatever it may be. So ask yourself, just really stop and contemplate this for a second. If you can answer it for yourself, what rituals have you created? Do you have any sort of routine? Because if you don't, and you find that you're flailing, and you find that you're never finding time, or barely finding time, or so much time goes by and you don't do it, you probably need a ritual. You probably need some set routine to keep you on track. So I want everybody right now, please do, write it down if you have something to write with. I know you all probably have a phone in your pocket that you can write with, or at least in your head. Okay, this is your exercise right now. To yourself, name one ritual you have created around your art making. If you haven't, or even if you have, name a ritual you would like to create. And I say write it down because the action of doing something puts it into physical space and makes it real. If you don't actually answer this question right now, it's just going to go away. So ask yourself, do you have any rituals? And what are some rituals you'd like to create? Just, name one even. I would recommend when you write these down that you put them somewhere, even if it's on your phone, print it out and slap it next to your computer. Slap it on your bathroom mirror if your family will let you. Put it somewhere that you can see it. Okay, so that 3 months from now, when you realize that you've been doing this ritual, you can congratulate yourself. Or 3 months from now, if you realize you completely neglected it, you can say, oh yeah. Because I really think it's important to create some routine in the work. Some of you might not have this problem, right? But I hear it over and over and over and over again. I've had so many students, thousands and thousands and thousands of students. And I hear over and over and over again how many students, after they leave school, can never find the time to do their work, are never doing it enough, or letting everything else get in the way, sometimes completely fall away from it and don't do it at all. And that's fine if you fall away and don't do it at all because you don't want to. But when you desire that and you're not doing it, okay, that's when my answer would be establish a routine. Okay, so ritual is practice, going to work every day or as often as you can make happen. And the reason we do that practice is to learn the materials as well. Right? You know that you will get your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO better the more you have your hands on that computer, on that camera, using it. right? You can read books until you're blue in the face. You can watch tutorials until you're blue in the face. You can hear teachers stand in front of the room and talk about it till you're blue in the face. But until you get in that field and get your hands on that camera, right? Until then, that's when you're going to actually learn the equipment. Same thing with Photoshop, right? Or Lightroom. You use it or you lose it. So the more hands-on you are with those programs, the more you're going to understand them. And of course, we go to classes to get over the humps of not understanding. But the practice is also learning the materials as well, in addition to establishing a creative routine. So I love quotes. I love, love, love quotes. I love words. So I thought I'd include some great quotes that I think have to do about creativity and routine. Can the people in the back see the text?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is part of the reason I named my magazine Butterflies and Anvils. I didn't realize it at the time that I'd be talking about ritual and curiosity 5 years later, but that's essentially what I was talking about, right? Love this quote. Okay, so let's move on to curiosity. The definition, one of the official definitions, is inquisitive interest leading to inquiry. One of my favorite quotes, Lewis Carroll, who actually was a photographer, not many of you know, right? He wrote Alice in Wonderland. Great quote, "Curiouser and curiouser," cried Alice. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet." Things that happen when we allow ourselves to be curious. The great Einstein, "I have no special talents, I am only passionately curious." So why is curiosity important? Why do I think that's the second half of the keys to creativity? Because curiosity leads to play, experimentation, and discovery. And this leads to what the gentleman in the beginning said, is finding something new in the work, right? That's how he defined creativity, is finding something new. Okay, this is how we find something new. That doesn't mean you can't take the same technique and do it over and over again. Look at Roy Lichtenstein making circles, right? Or Sally Mann shooting old 8x10 cameras with bellows and old traditional darkroom processes, right? So we can use the same technique over and over again, but by being curious, that technique can evolve and grow. So the man who invented Velcro, right? I'm sure some of you might know the story, but if you don't, so many inventions have been discovered because of curiosity, right? He was out for a walk with his dog, or many times was out for a walk with his dog, and came back and realized that these little burrs were attaching to his dog and to his coat. And instead of just going like, this is annoying, right? Of course, he is a scientist. But he takes them and looks at them under a microscope and starts to study, why are these things sticking, right? Because he was trying to develop a fastener, an alternative to the zipper. And then he realized that these burrs had these little, this little latch and hook was what was making them, adamantly attached to material and the dog's coat. Okay, and from that, he invented Velcro. But that was him going, what's this all about? Why isn't this coming off of me? Right? So there's so many. I mean, this is just the start, right? 1903 or 05, right? An 11-year-old boy left a drink that he had outside, upside down, that froze overnight in the winter. And the next day, he was like, this is tasty, right? It's a frozen, yummy drink. The Slinky was a man who was he was a naval engineer, mechanical engineer, and he was trying to develop springs, some heavy-duty springs as shocks for, some World War II or World War I. I guess it was World War II ships. And he had these springs that he was working on, and he dropped one, and it went rolling down the metal stairs of the ship. And he went, oh, that's kind of cool. What's that all about? So here is a mechanical naval engineer, and he creates one of the most famous toys, right? So not only the curiosity, but then that earlier quote from my friend Andy of taking that idea, no matter how weird it may seem, and running with it. So another artist that took what could be thought of as a mistake and turned it into a lifetime of work was Robert Rauschenberg, right? The great painter. And the story goes that Rauschenberg was working in his studio, and of course, a lot of painters in those days were using turpentine to clean their materials or maybe thin the paint. And he left the studio for a while, and he came back in, and apparently a can of turpentine had spilled over onto a canvas, and there it had doused a bunch of newspapers and magazines, and the turpentine had made all the images and text from the magazines transfer over to the canvas. So the image had gotten transferred, so there it was laying on the canvas. And instead of going, on a worse day, on the bad day, most of us would go in there and go, ruined, ditch it. Instead of doing that, he went, whoa, what just happened here? Did that turpentine just take that image and put it onto my canvas, right? And so he created image transfers. And we don't know if he was the first one to do this. I always caution, especially you New York-centric people who I love so much. There could be some guy or gal 10 years before down in the mountains of North Carolina doing this, but we don't know about it, right? So we don't know if he was the first one to do this, but he was the first one on the map who people were watching to do it, because he was in New York as a working artist, right? So he creates image transfers. And now we have a million ways to do image transfers. Right? I teach an alternative printing workshop, and we do a different technique each day, and one whole day is image transfers. But in the beginning, image transfers were done with turpentine, because that's how Robert Rauschenberg discovered them. So image transfers are a great way to take images, even if it's your own photographs that you print, and transfer them over onto another material. So not all materials we can get through printers. Wood, glass, ceramic, thick or hard things are hard to get through printers. So this is a way that we can get images onto other substrates. And here he is, Robert Rauschenberg on the left. Gerhard Richter, another great painter, German painter, who is another artist who's been working for 50 years now, still living, still working. But what I love about Gerhard Richter, not only is he really prolific with his work, and his work has taken on so many forms, but he continues to evolve, but there's always this element of the unexpected in his work. There's a great documentary called Gerhard Richter Paints, and that's basically what the whole documentary is you're in his studio watching him paint. So he does these really large-scale abstract paintings, but this is his method, is he uses squeegees. And what I love about this is, like Lichtenstein, he's taken a technique and used it over and over and over again. And the man knows his materials. I mean, you can see he's an old fella now, and this guy knows paint, he knows canvas, he knows how to use these squeegees. But watching that documentary was really interesting, because I realized that he can have no way of knowing what that next stroke is going to do. So he'll load the canvas up with different kinds of paint, he'll load the squeegee up, and he cannot entirely predict after he pulls that squeegee down that canvas what's going to happen. And he has moments in the documentary where he's got a painting at a part that he really likes it, and then he takes the squeegee, and then he's like, oh, yeah, I ruined it. Yep, that wasn't what I wanted to happen. I love that he has this element of knowing his materials and being an expert at what he does, but then this complete other half of curiosity, experimenting, and playing, and not always being able to predict. So these are some of the really large squeegees he uses. Okay, and I think as photographers, we can be a little guilty of this because our medium is such a technical medium, and because we all strive, as we should, to get to the point where we can make the camera make the image that we want it to make, the image that we see, right? As a beginner, you're like, that's not what I wanted the camera to do, or that's not what I saw. But the better you get at the medium, the more you can make that machine do what you want it to do. And same with the software, Lightroom and Photoshop. You can make that software do what you want it to do. Okay, so I think every photographer is a little bit of a control freak. I admit, right? We're all a little bit of control freaks if you're photographers. Okay, we like that control because control means that we're good at our skill and we understand how to use our materials. That's important. But I think, and I'm guilty, I think we can get a little too far down that road of control. I have to remind myself often in my photography to just stop and play a little bit, okay, and not always be so adamant about making that machine do exactly what I want it to do. So my friend Tom Condon, who was my colleague in graduate school, who said the tenacity, magic, and wonder, he has a great story. I'll make it very brief, but he was a painter. He went to undergrad for painting. After he graduated, he was having a lot of success showing nationally. As 21 years old, was starting to really build a pretty impressive career as a painter. And he had a really bad accident where he fell and shattered both of his arms from fingers to shoulders. So he was in a cast like this for 6 months or something, right? But he had been working so hard and working so much that he had all this creative energy build up, and it was driving him crazy to not do anything creative or make any work as he was like this. So he always had photographs. I'll just let you look at images. This is some of his paintings early on. He had always used photographs or photocopies or worked from photographs with his painting. So while he was in a cast, he started going to a copy machine and just putting things down and hitting the copy, just playing with a copy machine, sometimes dragging the copy while it was copying, just anything he could do to try to make something. And what he found after he healed is Tom didn't have the finite control of the brush anymore, and because of his wrists, and also this movement over time made him really sore. So he just realized that he probably couldn't be the painter that he had always been and that he wanted to be anymore. So he decided to go to graduate school, that's how I met him, for photography. And so this is some of the work that Tom started making after the painting. And these are photographs that he made, and then the figures are figures that he, on a photocopy machine, as they're copying, he's sliding it. So that's making them stretch and distort. And in Photoshop, he's placing them into the photograph. This was another body of work that he made in graduate school. So this is mixed media on wood panel. And you can see it's a lot of photographs. So these are old photographs of his family. And he's making little 4x6 machine prints because he worked at a photo lab and he had access to all that. And he's layering them onto these wood panels, putting other materials on them, drawing, sometimes burning, because this paper is heat sensitive and light sensitive. And then he starts to do this work. And this is where the curiosity comes in for me, watching Tom. I learned a lot being a studio mate with Tom for 2 years and watching him play and experiment. Okay, just like Richter, I watched him understand his materials, but then be willing to take the materials and play with them. Okay, so, and also making the most of your situation. I've watched Tom do that over and over and over again. He could have just said, well, I can't paint anymore, forget it, I'm ruined. And he said, okay, what can I do? And this is another example. He's poor, he's in graduate school, he's working at a 1-hour photo store. He hates it, okay, he hates it. But he's the guy who makes all the 4x6 machine prints. So he's got these huge rolls of this paper that make 4x6 machine prints. And like I said, this paper is light sensitive and heat sensitive. Okay, so the company's like, yeah, you can take those old rolls, if you want those, Tom, we're just gonna ditch them. And instead of being miserable in his job, right, and going, well, I hate this, he's like, well, what can I do with these free materials they're giving me, right? And so it's hard to see in this, but these are strips of 4x6 paper over and over and over again to make a big piece, okay? And he thought to himself, because he knows a little bit about photography, he thought, well, this is light sensitive and heat sensitive. So I wonder what would happen if I expose it to light and then expose it to heat as well. So he took these figures, he projected them onto the paper, okay, which light sensitive already made them sort of burn into the paper a little bit, and he traced the figures. But then what he would do is he would come in with a tiny little torch and trace the figure with the little torch, which is heat. And that would create, the next day we'd come in after we let it sit for a while, and it would maybe create the blue figure. And then he'd try it another day later, and we'd come back into the studio and it would create the red figure. So what he found is, based on the length of time that the paper sat, when he burned it, the colors changed. Now, who is going to figure this out? This is not something you find in a book. This is not something you Google. This is not something a teacher is going to tell you. The only way Tom figured this out was because he was in the studio going, well, all right, it's heat sensitive. I'm going to burn it and see what happens. And then I'm going to do it tomorrow, and then I'm going to do it the next day, and then I'm going to do it the next day. And so he made a whole body of work with this thermal paper using heat, and he's still using this paper. Like, he's like, I guess this project's done when all my paper runs out, right? So he's still using this technique, you know, now 6 years later, of burning this paper. Yeah, it's not the only thing he does, so it's one of his projects. I think he's, you know, saving the paper. But that's also being a fluid artist and saying, this work is done when the paper's out, right? Okay, but again, he was taking his experience and his understanding of paper being light sensitive and heat sensitive, but then moving into the unknown and the unexpected, like Gerhard Richter, okay? So I find I do this a lot because I am a control freak and I am a photographer who wants control of my lights and my Photoshop and my camera. I want them to do what I want them to do, but I make sure every now and then I throw in a project that is not about my control. And this is a project I did for a while with the Holga camera. You guys, you know, the Holgas and the Dianas, the plastic cameras that cost $20 and take medium format film. And this was in the film days before digital. But this was a project I called light leaks. And what I did is I took my Holga and I would just point it directly at a light source. Okay, because the lens is plastic. You never know how it's going to distort light. This was one of the first ones that I got where I was like, what are those purple things? You know, some people would go, oh, spirits, aliens, but I'm not that person. And so I was like, you know, I can be sometimes, but when it comes to photography, I was like, I know what's going on here. That's a light leak. And look how it turned purple. That's pretty cool. Right? And then I got, you know, some of these when I had more light leaks. And I had no idea these light leaks were going to come out as these glowing orbs in my photographs with color shifts, right? I knew what a light leak was going to do, but I didn't know what a light leak was going to do as the sun's directly hitting my plastic lens. Same thing here, right? Getting more of that lens flare look. So I worked on this project for a long time. I would just go out with the Holga and point it directly at a light source and see what I got. Sometimes I didn't get anything cool at all. Sometimes I did. And then, of course, I would scan the film, and in software, I would enhance and work the image a little bit. Like, I made these a little more purple and glowing than they were, but I just enhanced what was already there. Okay, so understanding film, understanding plastic cameras, okay, but not knowing what unobscured light rays was going to do when it hits the camera. And also knowing how to use my other tools to enhance the image the way I wanted it to look. Okay, this is another project that I did. This was one that I did in graduate school. This was my first foray into purely abstract work. And these were actually, these were X-rays from my body of what we thought were tumors, but they weren't. But at the time we thought they were, or a tumor. So I had these X-rays. So I used to be a custom darkroom printer for 4 years. So I spent a lot of time in the darkroom. You know, I did that professionally. And so, you know, here I have these X-rays that are this big, and I'm like, well, this is just a negative, right? I got some negatives here. And of course, it was all the different views of it. And so I had access to an 8x10 and larger in graduate school and a darkroom. And so I was like, God, I wonder what would happen if I tried to print these negatives? And so I printed them, and I would move them around in the enlarger so they would get different shapes, and I printed them on just 11 by 14 fiber paper, traditional darkroom paper. And then I thought, well, I kind of want to make them bigger. What would happen if I made them bigger? And then I took them to Kinko's and I scanned them. And then I printed them on the biggest printer they had, which happened to be the architectural printers that printed on vellum for blueprints. Right? This is, 8 years ago. And so then I got these big 4x5 prints on vellum, and the vellum was kind of transparent, right? And then I thought, well, so now I have these big prints. Now I'm getting excited, right? And again, this is all me not knowing what the next step is going to be or what's going to happen in the next step. Once I left that darkroom, it was like, I don't know. So again, printed them on the vellum and then thought, I wonder what would happen if I waxed this vellum, because vellum is clear, wax is heat. And I know wax does interesting things to paper. So I thought it might do some interesting things to the vellum. And then because I was in the studio with Tom, who was just torching everything, I was like, hey, can I borrow that torch for a second? And so then I just started burning the wax, knowing that the vellum's not going to catch on fire like paper would, right? And that's where I'm starting to get these weird, some of the brown spots and some of the weird, looking like little bursts is how the wax is changing when the heat's hitting it, okay? So this was just pure experimentation, not knowing what the next step was what was gonna happen. And I had so much fun. This was probably the first time, besides the Holga light leaks, that I worked in this way where I would just get an idea and try it and have no idea if the thing was gonna blow up or if it was gonna be cool or if I was gonna like it or not, if I was gonna ruin it, okay? But each step was a pure experiment. This is another series that I did in graduate school, and I use this as an example because it was my first foray into a material called gel medium, which is what painters use, and it was my first foray into installation. Taking things off the wall and moving them three-dimensionally into a room as a photographer. And again, it was step by step, just experimenting, but also sticking with those ideas, working with images that I liked and going with the next idea, even if it seemed ridiculous and stupid. Okay, so this is an old film of my dad doing a swan dive off a high dive, way before I was around. He was like in his 20s. And it's this beautiful old film footage of him doing this, jumping off the dive and doing the swan dive into a pool. And when I saw that footage, there was just something about it. I was like, that is so beautiful. And that's just so cool to see my dad died right before I went to graduate school. Seeing him, this young man who I'd never seen him, I've seen pictures, but seeing him in action in film like that, because I was born when he was in his 30s, right? And there was something about that footage that was so beautiful to me. And so I have worked with that footage for years. So what I did is I took that footage and I broke it down frame by frame. I made a still photograph off of each frame. Okay, knew how to do that with my software, video editing software. And then I printed each of the still frames onto a piece of gel medium. So this is a gel medium transfer. And that was a long process of figuring out how to get that the way I wanted it. So they're these thick, chewy pieces of clear gel medium with the image on it. And then I hung them in the sequence of the dive, so in order. And I hung them on these wires and I lit them in a way, because I understood lighting, that would, if you went behind them, they were illuminated, like you were watching a film. And then they also created these shadows on the wall. And for me, I still like this project when I look at it, but this is really important. Those last two projects I showed you, this one and the last one, are really important because these projects taught me to really open my mind and to really run with ideas and to not limit myself to everything I had known up to then, which is a very, very traditional way of doing photography. Black and white, fiber prints, archival, white frame, white matte, black frame, right? That's how I learned photography. Do it all properly in an archival way that's safe and proper and in the school of Ansel Adams, right? And I still respect that. But it was time for me personally to blow the lid off of how I saw photography and start doing it differently, right? And that work has led to lots of other work. You can see these are the shadows that I'm using from the last installation. This is a picture of my dad, and this was my final thesis show, where I'm also projecting images onto handmade screens with gel medium in an installation. But that came from pure play and experimentation. Okay, how many people here do night photography? Painting with light? If that's not pure play and experimentation, I don't know what is, right? Now, again, you're taking technically what you know, okay? You need to know where to even begin with those long exposures, right? What that light's gonna do in a long exposure, how to handle your equipment for long exposures, right? What temperature of lights are gonna do. So it's good to understand the technical aspects of it, but you can almost never completely predict what that exposure is going to look like until it comes up on the back of your camera and you see it, right? And then you go from there, right? But that's why I love night photography. I mean, Gabe here, right, is one of the great night photographers who works here at B&H. So this is, again, I try to make, in my photography and in my work, I try to make myself play and experiment as often as possible, right? And so this is playing in my friend's backyard, and all I'm working with are like clamp garage lights. Okay, I'm also a strong advocate of working with the materials we have and not going bankrupt as photographers, okay? Because I've been a working artist for 20 years, and if I bought everything I wanted, I would be in the poorhouse, no doubt, right? So I work with what I have, I work with what I can afford. What's that?
Is this the right store to stay there?
Is this the right store to stay there? Probably not. I think they're doing okay. I think they're doing okay. So again, this is using garage clamp lights and flashlights, right? So I have a garage clamp light laying on the ground outside the frame, just blasting onto the pole. This is just light from the alley, right? And then here you can see I'm painting the tree itself and the hammock with the flashlight. And I'm wearing all black, so if I have to run in there and you don't see me because it's a long exposure. But I love night photography because you can't always predict. And you just have to take the shot, look at the back of the screen and go, oh, okay, I'd like more light over here, less light over here, longer exposure, shorter exposure. This was one night I woke up in the middle of the night and it sounded like a freight train was coming through the house. It was so windy. And I knew it was a full moon that night. And so I just stepped outside because I was like, whoa, it's wild how crazy the wind's going. And it's in the summer. And I step out and there's a full moon, beautiful stars, and the wind is just whipping. And I thought, oh, what a cool time to shoot, right? Because there's lots of available light and the wind's making things move. And so this was just a self-portrait that I did. And you can see I'm out of focus and my hair is just blowing. And then this one was, I was cleaning my windows because, I don't know, I had some windows I was cleaning. And the window frames, I decided to put them on the ground because I knew that they were white and they would reflect the moonlight well. Right? I put on a white dress because I knew that would reflect light well. And this is a flash on my camera that's illuminating this window frame and a little bit of me and a little bit of this window frame, but that's going to fall off fast. So then I have a little flashlight in my hand that I'm blasting onto this window. You can see it's a slightly different light. And then I'm also taking that flashlight and just quickly flashing behind my dress a little bit. Okay, so I know enough about light that my flashlight hitting these white things is going to reflect them. And of course I would look at the camera and decided I wanted more light on the first windowsill or more light on the second windowsill. Okay, so that was technical knowledge. However, what I didn't know, which is my favorite part about the photograph until I got them onto my computer large and looked at them, that I didn't know I was gonna look like there was like fairy dust stars swirling around my dress. I had no idea. I couldn't even see that on the back of the camera in the dark in the middle of the night. And when I got the images on the computer the next day, I was like, whoa, what is that? That's my favorite part of the photograph. And that was just the wind rapidly blowing my dress while I was lighting it. It was kind of transparent. Either that or some little, fairies came along and spread some fairy dust while I wasn't watching. I don't know. But that was unexpected, and that came out of also just pure play. And just having the desire, in the middle of the night when it's windy with the full moon to just go, I don't know, let's go out and make some photographs. This could be fun. This is another one of those images in my work that just like the circles, or like the paint brushes, or like the swan dive of my dad's, that has stayed with my work for a long time. And I cannot tell you why, but it just has. So when I was in graduate school, we went to the National Archives in DC. You know, you can get cleared to go in there, and you can basically copy anything that they will let you, as much as you can grab in the time you're there to bring with you. Okay, so you can copy old footage. So we had a video project where we had to use all archival footage for our piece. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had no plan. I mean, everybody else was like on task. You know, they knew what they wanted, and I was just, I mean, that place is huge. I'm walking around there going, I don't know even what I'm doing, right? I don't know. So I thought it would be kind of cool to get footage from like the 50s, that era. And so I found this footage of this woman walking out of this house. This was all the sequence was. She comes out of the house, she puts the umbrella up, and she walks down her walk. And I watched that footage like 15 times in a row. And it was like that flickering old film, and it was kind of in slow motion. And there was something about it that really intrigued me. And I love that we never saw her face. It was just beautiful. And so I took it, and I call her the umbrella lady, and I have used her in my work for probably 8 years, on and off, right? These are more of those wood panels, mixed media. You know, there she is, there she is, there she is again. And some of this work, you know, has gone out into the world. Some of it's just sitting in my computer, right? But it's that curiosity, right? That moment of going, I don't know what it is about this lady, but I love this umbrella lady. And just taking the footage. This was a show that I did, and it was all these traditional sort of black and white film prints. And then I made this little decal sticker of the umbrella lady, and I just put her on the wall. And it was so interesting how many people came to the show, and you know, I had this was on handmade Japanese paper. It was all of trees. And you know, it was interesting to watch who noticed the umbrella lady and who didn't. And so many people were like, what's with this little lady down here? You know, and I was like, oh, she just needs to be a part of the show. She's just there, you know. But I just loved her presence right there, right? One of the first things I did when I got into my studio, you can see there's no furniture, there's nothing on the wall, is I had a transparency and I projected her huge just to see what it would look like, right? I never did anything with it, but I took a picture of it, and I just wanted to see what it would look like. So taking those ideas in your head, no matter how strange they seem, not even knowing why, and running with them. That becomes your personal vision, it becomes your style, right? And it can be something that can inspire you over a long amount of time. This is one of the first pieces I made in my studio. It's rolled up right now in storage. I mean, I haven't really showed it, but one of the first things I did when I got into my studio, I know I wanted to go big because I hadn't had space to go big in a long time. So this is like the size of this wall. And I just noticed the little circles I'm drawing. I started by drawing these little circles everywhere, and then I just started to connect the dots in random ways. And then I put the umbrella lady there. And it's not that I don't know what this is about. In my head, I understand. It's chaos and her small figure outside of the chaos, protected with the umbrella, you know, from the chaos or disorder or maybe order, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, so some other interesting facts about curiosity. And I'll leave time for questions. I would usually take questions through the whole thing. I don't like that I'm just standing up here talking, but that's the way we have to work it today. So just some other interesting facts about curiosity. There is a book that was written called The Psychology of Curiosity in 1994 by George Lowenstein. And he said some interesting things in this book. They did some interesting studies. He defined curiosity as a gap between what we know and what we want to know. Right? That makes sense. This gap then creates a sensation or deprivation or some sort of discomfort, uncertainty, right? There's got to be that moment of uncertainty or discomfort that makes you then have the desire to want to know the thing. It becomes an emotional response, a desire to know, a mental itch that needs scratched. Okay, just like if you would have walked into that National Archives and saw the umbrella footage, you might not just walked right by it. Or just like you'll walk down the street and see a photograph that the rest of the people in the room won't. Okay, but there's something there that makes you want to know more. Okay, and I'll talk about that more. But so what about this uncertainty, right? Uncertainty was one of my 6 original steps in the cycle of creativity. Okay, here's some more quotes that I love. This is one of my favorite quotes ever, right? We have met the enemy and he is us, no doubt. I also love that it was just said by a possum, of all things, right? From a great book, Art and Fear, one of my favorites on the top of my list of all-time books. Uncertainty is the essential, inevitable, and all-pervasive companion to your desire to make art. And tolerance for uncertainty is the prerequisite to succeeding. Okay? If you want to be an artist that makes new work or interesting work, right, you have to live with uncertainty. And don't get me wrong, I mean, when I'm not going to stand up here and wax poetic. Like when I was in the studio burning and waxing and doing all those things, I wasn't confidently forging ahead going, look what I'm doing, isn't this amazing? I was like, I don't know, should I burn it? What happens if I burn it? I mean, I've been working on this for 3 weeks. What if I burn it and I ruin it? Or what if, But you know, you work with that. Just like the uncertainty of when you put your work out to the world. Are they gonna hate it? Are they gonna love it? Do I care? Right? It's just a part of the process. We have to be comfortable with it. Or maybe you're not comfortable with it, you just accept that it is. Control is not the answer. What's really needed is a broad sense of what you are looking for, some strategy for how to find it or make it, and an overriding willingness to embrace mistakes and surprises along the way. Right? Twyla Tharp in her book talks about the danger of over-planning. Right? She says, transforming your ideas rarely goes according to plan. I'm sure anybody who's renovated a house or built a house or anything, right? Or if you're someone who designs things, right? It almost never ends up the way that you originally thought. But if you can hang on to a thread of the idea, right? Have a general broad sense of what you are looking for and the strategy, okay? Like for instance, night shooting, the strategy, knowing the tools, knowing the techniques, knowing some things along the way, but being open to what happens and letting some of that go. So we have newer studies about curiosity since Lowenstein's book in '94. These new studies find that curiosity is related to memory. So the more curious we are about a subject, the better our retention of the information, right? I mean, that makes sense, okay? Some of you are interested in, you know, whatever, World War I history or, you know, Italian Renaissance painters, others aren't. If it doesn't pique your curiosity, you know, you're not going to remember those facts. I'm always amazed and dismayed sometimes at sorry guys, but maybe I'll say a small percentage, maybe it's not everybody, but the way men can remember statistics about sports is mind-boggling to me, right? I mean, they might not remember general daily things, but I'm blown away by how men remember statistics from sports. Maybe women do too, I just don't know any. But that, I mean, I can't remember what year I graduated high school barely. You know, I mean, numbers just don't stay in my head because it doesn't matter to me, right? Or I have that friend that's like, oh, that was December of 1993. The end of December, and I'm like, I don't even know if that was the 90s or the 80s or the 2000s, because it doesn't matter to me, but it matters to them, right?
I bet you remember the maximum f-stop on the lenses you used.
I remember my f-stops and shutter speeds. Of course they do, yes. And I think everyone should be able to recite them, right? Now, I love when my students are like, I'll say, you know, or I'll ask them to open up on their f-stop and they'll say, well, how many clicks is that? And I'm like, click is not a photographic term. When I ask you to open up 2 stops, you need to know what that means, right? Anyway, okay, so the more curious we are about a subject, the better our retention of the information. Not surprising. However, what's interesting is researchers found that the brain's ability to learn was increased when curiosity was piqued, and this lasted into the next day. So the memory retention lasted after the fact. Okay, that's interesting. There's a lot of studies on curiosity and memory and how they connect. Another really great book that's very scientific. If you're not that scientific linear thinker, you might not want to read this book, but if you are, it's fascinating. It's called Your Creative Brain by Shelley Carson. She's a Harvard professor, and they literally are like, rigging brains up with electrodes, studying brain activity in creative people and non-creative people. Really interesting research. So, as we talked about earlier, the key with curiosity is we can be curious and curious and curious, but the key is taking that curiosity or taking that idea and turning it into action, which is why I asked all of you to write down the ritual that I want you to plan on, right? So turning that idea or that curiosity into something tangible or physical is important, okay? It takes both. Right? You can be all about the action. You can go into your studio every single day, and clean your studio for 2 weeks straight, right? Why is it that every professor that I know that goes on a sabbatical cleans their toilet 10 times before they do anything, or their house is spotless and their garage is organized and, they do everything else but get to whatever they planned on doing eventually, okay? But so we can have a lot of action with no ideas, or we can have a lot of ideas with no action. So it takes both, hence the ritual and the curiosity. So curiosity is about experimentation, being open to accidents, and having an open mind to the possibilities, and listening to that voice in your head that goes, there's something about this photograph, or there's something about this technique, or there's something about this place. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what it is, but I think I'm going to run with it. So 2 very innovative historical photographers who, interesting enough, neither of them were trained as photographers. They were both trained as designers and sculptors. And I find in the history of photographers, some of the most innovative people using the camera were not trained photographers. Not surprising if you think about it, right? Trained photographers were like, I know how to do this, especially because it was such a technical medium in the beginning with all the chemicals and all the materials and all the equipment, right? They had a path that they knew that they needed to use to make that image, where the sculptors and the designers just came to the camera and were like, I don't know, what can I do with this thing, right? So Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was a trained designer and sculptor. He was a heavy, heavy advocate of experimenting with the camera. Okay, I love this quote by him. The enemy of photography is convention, the fixed rules of how to do. The salvation of photography comes from the experiment. And this is some of his work. He was known for his really interesting camera angles. At a time, now this might look regular to us, ordinary, but this was a time where people were not shooting directly overhead. Paul Strand was doing it very early on in the 1920s and before, but he was pretty much the only one at that time who was taking really unique camera angles. This is also Laszlo Moholy-Nagy playing with light and light painting. He did a lot of photographs with light and mirrors and projections of light. And this is him purely painting with light at a time that this didn't really exist. He was actually the first, they asked him to be faculty at the Bauhaus, and he said, I'll be faculty if you allow me to create a photography department. And so he taught photography, really he was the first full-time professor at a school teaching photography at a respected university. Another great artist who was part of the Russian constructivist movement, Alexander Rodchenko, again, a trained designer and sculptor. It is our duty to experiment. And he was also known for his really interesting camera angles and his really interesting use of light and shadow and shapes. And we're going to talk about this in the Seeing in Black and White class and why this work is so fantastic. This is him on your left is him with a sculpture that he made, and then this is a photo collage. So some nice quotes about curiosity. Curiosity about life and all of its aspects, I think, is still the secret of great creative people. I love in that Inspirations video, they ask Edward Locke, who's a choreographer, a modern dance choreographer. They ask him about failure and how he handles failure, and he's completely baffled by the question. He's like, what do you mean, how I handle it? He's like, dancers fall every day. They fall every hour. And he's like, I fail all the time. I probably fail more than I succeed. As a choreographer of modern dance, he's like, I never know, what it's going to look like until I have the dancer do it, and I never know how the public's going to receive it. He's just like, yeah, I fail all the time. So what? He just totally brushes off the question, like, that's a silly question. Why would I even entertain? What do you mean? How do I deal with failure? I just do. So again, if you could sit and maybe write the answer down or just think about it, when was the last time you were curious in your art, in your life, in your photography? Let's say in your photography. I don't know that everybody in here is photographers, but when was the last time? And when was the last time you acted on that curiosity? Probably more importantly. So if everybody could write down, or at least in their head say it to themselves, name one curiosity that led to an idea for you. If this were a small workshop, I would have us all share it and we'd talk about it. I wish we could. I like interactive experiences, but not the venue for it. Okay, if you can't think of one, that's okay. Then you know that this is the work that you have to do, right? Just like with the ritual, if you're that person who wants it so badly but can't make the time for it, then you need to work on that side of it, okay? So if you can't think of the last time you were curious and you acted on it and it led to something in your photography, then you just got a little bit of work to do, right? Then I suggest you schedule a play date for yourself, right? Go do some night photography. Point your camera out of a moving car. Spin it around while the shutter's open, right? Get a Holga and go shoot some plastic cameras. Play around in Photoshop or Lightroom, whatever it may be. Maybe get into some mixed media with other materials. I'm not sure what it is for you, but I think you should schedule some time to just play with your photography. And I have, in my process, have had to do both. I've had times where I had to batten down the hatches and get serious and create some schedule for myself. And I've had times that I've had to lighten up and not be so serious and just go play. But you also have to be honest with yourself of where you're lacking. Okay, so why are both of them important? Okay, we've talked about ritual, we've talked about curiosity. I hope some of the stories that I've shared with my work can give you some insight into how these have been helpful for me. We've heard a lot from other artists, right? They're both integral to the creative process. I feel that ritual without curiosity can become mundane habit. And it can risk becoming too comfortable, right? If you always go shoot the same thing, if you always use the same lens, if you always process your images the same way, if you always photograph the same time of day, if you always photograph with the same people, or you always photograph alone, or you always photograph in a group, right? It can make a big difference who you photograph with. Or like I said, if you're a solo shooter, see what happens if you go shoot with other people. Or if you always shoot with people, see what happens if you go off on your own, right? Whatever it may be. But ritual without curiosity can start to become too comfortable and too mundane. Curiosity without ritual can end up with a lot of play, but no structure or no accomplishments. And accomplishments can be defined as whatever that means to you in your work. But I know a lot of students, or I've had a lot of students who do a lot of playing and still have no portfolio to show for it. Together, however, you create structure and routine with play and improvisation to spark experimentation. And why is this even important, right? Why is all this even important? Why does it matter, okay? What is the end goal? The end goal is finding your own work. Finding your style, your voice, your work. No one can tell you what your work is. No one can tell you how to make it. Okay, only you can. And one of my favorite quotes, I say that all the time, one of my favorite quotes, from the book Art and Fear is this one. You learn how to make your work by making your work. Okay, if I could when I die, if someone asked me what's the key to creativity? This is what I would say. You learn how to make your work by making your work. Oh, I didn't realize I put that transition in there. Wow. So some suggestions from the book of how to find your own work. And this is really just reiterating, I think, what I've probably been saying most of the lecture. Your work is a mirror reflection of who you are. Just like the guy who walked up to me and said, I don't know this thing about style. And I was like, you got it going on right here. Viewing art and making art are fundamentally different. They're sources for our desire or inspiration, but they do not show us the way, right? Just like teachers can teach you things, you can read books, okay, but it can't tell you how to make your work. They can inspire us for sure. If certain work is resonating with you, then that is the work you need to be doing, right? If you just find that you want to be out at night all the time shooting, don't force yourself to go shoot in the middle of the day then, right? You know, I mean, I just like circles. I'm just going with it, right? When we hit blocks or nothing is working, we can return to the tried and true to get back on track. Okay, when I got my studio and I hadn't been working for a while and I was frustrated and I was feeling lost, what did I do? I went in there and just started doodling circles. And even though it felt ridiculous and useless, it brought me back to the work I needed to be making. Then once you're back on track, you can begin to evolve and grow and change the work. But you gotta make the work to start. If you need to work one concept repeatedly, by all means do it. Like for me, the umbrella lady, the circles, whatever it may be. Since it's at the end, I'll take that question. Yes?
Yeah. Who wrote the book, Art and Fear?
Art and Fear is Bales and Olson. Ted Olson and David Bales. Thank you.
Bales, B-A-L-E-S?
B-A-Y-L-E-S and Ted Olson, O-L-S-O-N. Love that book because these guys are professors, dads, husbands, and working artists. So it's a really...
O-L-S-O-N.
O-L-S-O-N. It's a really practical guide to making, yes, to making work and also being a real person who has to live a life and make dinner and take out the trash and go to work every day with a job, with a salary, you know. It's great. Find your productive patterns. Again, how's the best way you're gonna be productive? Just like my painter friend who was like, Eileen, you're getting a little crazy with this, have to get to the studio every day. That's unnecessary. For me, at that point, it was necessary. Okay, what are your productive patterns? And when you find them, stick with them. The other thing I just want to follow up with saying is, and asking you is, what do you love, right? I've done whole lectures on this in my workshops. I've written articles about this, meaning what gets you excited? If you can combine the things that you love in life and get you excited with your photography, that's gonna be that much more exciting, that much more inspiring, right? That's why probably some of the greatest sports photographers are huge sports fans. And some of the greatest wildlife photographers don't mind sitting out in the cold for hours on end, waiting for a bird to move, right? I could never do that. I could never do that, right? So what do you love? What interests you outside of photography? Okay? There's a reason I teach photo history, because I love history. So what do you love, and how can you try to infuse that in with your photography? How can you blend it in? Okay, that's gonna get you that much more excited. I love words. I love to speak them. I'm a teacher. I love to write them. I'm a writer. I love to read. I love poetry. I love quotes. So I have been using words in my images in every way, shape, and form I can find for like 15 years. And that is my go back to my tried and true with photography. When I am sort of like, I don't know, I go back to words. I could teach a class on 10 million ways to use words in your photographs, right? I have found maybe not every possible way. I'm not showing you all of them, but I have tried a lot of ways to put words into images. Find a muse. Okay, that's why I said when I ask my students who they like and they can't name anyone, or they whip out the token Ansel Adams. I love Ansel Adams too, everyone. But I can't believe that every single person completely relates to a photographer from 60 years ago who shot large format black and white nature photography. Okay? I appreciate Ansel Adams. I was a custom darkroom printer. I cried the first time I saw an Ansel Adams print, but is he my #1 muse? No, because I don't do work like that. Okay, so I think a lot of people just say Ansel Adams because they don't know who else to say, right? So find your muse. And that doesn't have to be a photographer. It could be a painter. It could be a dancer. It could be a friend. Some of the greatest artists had muses, right? Edward Weston had many muses / lovers. But some of the greatest artists, right? Stieglitz had Georgia O'Keeffe. So my muse is Yasunari Kawabata. I told you I mentioned him earlier, the Japanese poet. He was the first Nobel Prize winner for literature from Japan. And I found one of his books many, many years ago, a book of short stories, and I fell in love with his writing. And I devoured every book he had ever written. I just read his work for about a year. And then I all of a sudden I had the desire to get his images of him into my work somehow. And for probably 10 years or more now, I've been using his images in my work. And that's not consistently. I'll go away from it and I'll come back. So these are some of the wood panels that are photo emulsion silk screens with paint. And this is the work that I'm doing now. He is my muse, there's no question. And when I'm off track or I don't know where to go, I find myself coming back to his images. I did not plan on going into my studio and I'd stepped away. I did that thing of, yeah, just let it go, Eileen, come on. You know, you're a little obsessed with Kawabata. Let it go, you've been putting his images in your work for a while. Okay, and I let it go for probably 5 or 6 years. And here I am, back using images of him. This is a detail of the last one. If you want to talk about serendipity, I absolutely fell in love with him, was using his images in my work, and he actually committed suicide, which is really frowned upon in Japanese culture, you know, that type of suicide, regular suicide. And he was 70 some years old, and people were really baffled why he would do this. He was famous, and there's lots of theories on why, but I realized many years later, I was reading something about him, and he actually committed suicide on the exact day that I was born, right? So you want to talk about just taking something and running with it? Now, do I think I'm some incarnate of Kawabata? No, I wish. He was an amazing writer. But you know, there's something interesting about that. Don't forget to daydream and get lost, right? This is just literally laying in the grass, laying in a field, shooting, right, for hours. Daydreaming and staring and noticing shadows. Okay, so these all just come from play or daydreaming, staring out my winter window in the Montana winter that's not insulated well and ice all over my window, right? Seeing the light as it falls on my office wall. So the structure is important, but it's also good to just let the mind wander and just play and experiment. I love shooting out of airplane windows, right? Julian Cost has built a whole body of work just shooting out of airplane windows. I love daydreaming on airplanes, just staring out the window. So don't forget, you learn how to make your work by making your work. This is where I wanted to put a slide in that would wake you up if you're not awake yet, right? Send the message. You learn how to make your work by making your work. This is another great quote from Art and Fear. Look at your work and it tells you how it is when you hold back or when you embrace. When you are lazy, your art is lazy. When you hold back, it holds back. When you hesitate, it stands there staring, hands in its pockets. But when you commit, it comes on like blazes. Okay? The work will tell you where you are and where you need to be. It's the only way. So I'm just going to finish with some quotes, some of my favorites about inspiration and creativity. I have this one up on my studio wall, and I have it at the end of every email I write. And I would argue, but what it does to us is what it does to the maker and the viewer. We have something to say, right? You wouldn't make images if you didn't want people to look at them and think something or feel something, right? We all have something to say. All right, we have just a couple minutes left. Any thoughts, any questions? Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.